Chris McLean didn't just host Total Drama Island. He controlled the game. He knew the contestants' fears, created dangers, manipulated the rules, and could change the competition whenever it made better television. And the craziest part? Most of the contestants never realized how much control he actually had. Episode 3, The Big Sleep. It starts in Episode 3, The Big Sleep. The contestants are already exhausted, but Chris doesn't give them a chance to recover. He wakes them up and immediately sends them into a 20-kilometer race. By itself, that's already brutal enough. But when they finally finish, Chris reveals that the race wasn't even the real challenge. Now they have to stay awake for 70 hours. The important detail is that Chris knows exactly what he's doing. These contestants aren't starting from zero. They're already exhausted, and Chris deliberately carries that exhaustion into the next challenge. As the hours pass, they become confused, emotional, and barely capable of thinking clearly. For the contestants, exhaustion is a disadvantage. For Chris, it's entertainment. The more they break down, the more entertaining the episode becomes. And once Chris realizes how effective psychological pressure can be, he finds an even better weapon: their fears. Episode 7, Phobia Factor. In Episode 7, Phobia Factor, Chris takes information about the contestants' biggest fears and turns it into the challenge. He doesn't simply ask them to complete the same obstacle. He creates situations specifically designed to make each person panic. Gwen is buried underground, while the other contestants are forced to confront things they genuinely fear. And that's what makes this challenge different from a normal competition. Chris isn't testing everyone equally. He's targeting their personal weaknesses. The contestants thought they were competing with their physical abilities. Chris knows that sometimes the easiest way to defeat someone is to figure out what scares them. And this is the point where the pattern starts becoming obvious. Chris isn't just watching the competition. He's studying the contestants and using what he learns against them. But in the next episode, he doesn't need to discover a weakness. He creates the danger himself. Episode 8, Up the Creek. During Up the Creek, Trent and Lindsay become trapped in quicksand. At first, it looks like an unfortunate accident. They're on an island, they're doing a dangerous challenge, and sometimes things go wrong. Except this wasn't simply bad luck. Chris had deliberately set up the trap. That changes the entire situation. The contestants believe they're fighting against the environment, but the environment itself is being controlled by Chris. He can decide where the danger is, how difficult the challenge becomes, and what the contestants have to survive. They're not just competing against each other anymore. They're competing against a host who can literally build obstacles designed to catch them. And Chris isn't finished. Because if a little danger makes good television, giving the contestants paintball guns makes it even better. Episode 9, Paintball Deer Hunter. In Episode 9, Paintball Deer Hunter, Chris sends the contestants into the forest and turns the competition into a giant hunt. They have paintball guns, they're hiding behind trees, ambushing each other, and trying to eliminate members of the opposing team. Chris is completely comfortable watching the chaos unfold. And that's important because the danger isn't an accident anymore. The chaos is the entertainment. Chris wants the contestants scared, aggressive, and desperate, because those are the moments that make the show worth watching. Then Cody gets injured after encountering a bear, but the competition continues. At this point, you can see what Chris actually values. The contestant's safety comes second. The show comes first. But there's one episode where his obsession with creating danger goes so far that the situation stops being completely under his control. Episode 19, Hook, Line, and Screamer. In Hook, Line, and Screamer, Chris creates a horror scenario where the contestants believe a killer is hunting them on the island. They're hiding, running, and trying to figure out who they can trust. For Chris, this is supposed to be another fake scare designed for entertainment. Then something goes wrong. A real threat appears. Suddenly, the contestants can't tell what's part of the challenge and what's actually dangerous. Chris has spent so much time convincing them that terrifying situations are just entertainment, that they can't even trust their own perception of what's happening. And that's the problem with Chris's style of hosting. He constantly pushes the line between a challenge and genuine danger. He wants the contestants frightened because fear creates better television, but eventually he creates a situation where even he can't completely control the consequences. Chris wanted a scary episode. He got something much more serious. And if you think Chris only manipulates the contestants physically and psychologically, Episode 15 shows that he can manipulate something even more important. The rules. Episode 15. No pain, no game. Throughout the competition, the contestants have every reason to believe that elimination is permanent. If you're voted out, your game is over. That's one of the basic rules everyone understands. Then Chris brings Eva and Izzy back. Suddenly, the contestants can't even be sure that elimination means what they thought it meant. And this isn't just a funny twist. It completely changes the strategy of the competition. Contestants make decisions based on the information they have. If someone is permanently gone, you can plan around that. But if Chris can suddenly bring someone back, those decisions can become useless. Chris doesn't have to cheat during a challenge. He can simply change the situation surrounding the challenge. And sometimes he doesn't even need to change a rule. He just needs to interpret it differently. Episode 18. That's off the chain. That's exactly what happens in episode 18. That's off the chain. During the bicycle challenge, Lindsay believes she's done enough to stay safe. She finishes the race and has every reason to think she's in a good position. But Chris points out a technicality involving Owen and Duncan and how their damaged bikes affect whether they actually completed the course. Suddenly, the result changes. This is where the competition becomes really interesting because the rules may exist on paper, but Chris is the person deciding how those rules apply. The contestants think they're competing inside a fixed system. They aren't. If Chris decides that a technicality matters, it matters. If the interpretation changes the outcome, the contestants simply have to accept it. So even performing well doesn't necessarily guarantee safety. You also have to survive Chris's interpretation of the rules. And that's a huge advantage for the person running the entire show. Episode 16. Search and do not destroy. But Chris doesn't have to manipulate every contestant himself. Sometimes he creates a game where the contestants do it for him. Episode 16. Search and do not destroy is a perfect example. Heather manipulates Gwen and Trent, creates distrust, and uses their relationships to protect herself during the elimination. Heather understands something that some of the other contestants don't. You don't necessarily have to be the strongest player, you just have to control the people around you. That's because Chris has built a competition where social manipulation is incredibly powerful. Contestants have to form alliances, betray people, protect themselves, and constantly guess who is going to vote against them. The physical challenges are only half the game. The other half is psychological. And Chris created the environment that makes that possible. Which brings us to one of the biggest problems with the entire competition. Even winning doesn't necessarily mean you're safe. Episode 11. Who Can You Trust? In Episode 11, Who Can You Trust?, the contestants are literally challenged to trust each other. But once the challenge ends, they still have to face the elimination ceremony. And that's where the real game begins. You can help your team and still become a target. You can perform well and still be voted out. You can trust someone today and discover tomorrow that they need you gone to protect themselves. Chris has created a system where cooperation is necessary, but trusting people too much can get you eliminated. The contestants aren't just fighting the challenges, they're fighting the alliances, the betrayals, and the paranoia that Chris has built into the competition. And after watching all of this, you might think there is at least one thing Chris can't control: the winner. Except even that isn't completely true. Episode 26. The very last episode. Really? The contestants make it through the entire season, believing they're working toward one final result. They've survived brutal challenges, betrayals, injuries, and eliminations because they believe there's going to be one winner who takes the $1 million. But the first season has two versions of the finale. In one version, Owen wins. In another, Gwen wins. And that is honestly the perfect ending to everything we've just seen. Because throughout the entire season, Chris controls almost every part of the competition. He controls the challenges, he exploits the contestants' fears, he creates traps, he controls the information they receive, he can bring eliminated contestants back. He decides how rules are interpreted, and whenever something goes wrong, he can turn it into another episode. The contestants think they're competing against each other, but they're actually competing inside a world controlled by Chris. They don't decide what the next challenge will be. They don't decide what information they'll receive. They don't decide what dangers they'll face. And they don't get the final say on how the rules are interpreted. Chris does. And that's why he doesn't even need to secretly rig every challenge to have an enormous advantage. He controls the system itself. The contestants were trying to win $1 million. Chris was trying to make good television. And when the person running the competition controls the challenges, the information, the rules, and the consequences, the contestants aren't really playing an equal game. They're playing Chris McLean's game. And Chris was never interested in making that game fair. He was interested in making it entertaining. That's why the game was never fair in the first place.